καλωσορίζω στο δεύτερο μέρος της συζήτησής μας εδώ στους Δελφούς στο 11ο Οικονομικό Φόρουμ. Σε αυτό το ημίωρο θα επικεντρωθούμε στη διαχρονική παρουσία της ελληνικής γλώσσας στην Ευρώπη και στο ρόλο της στη διαμόρφωση της πνευματικής παράδοσης. Ας μην ξεχνάμε ότι ένας από τους βασικότερους λόγους αυτής της διαχρονικότητας είναι η πλαστικότητα και η αντοχή της ελληνικής γλώσσας μέσα στο χρόνο. Από την ομηρική και την κλασική εποχή, στα ελληνιστικά χρόνια, τη ρωμαϊκή περίοδο, το χριστιανισμό και το Βυζάντιο, έως και τις νεότερες μορφές της, η ελληνική γλώσσα διατηρεί μια εντυπωσιακή συνέχεια και εξακολουθεί να εμπνέει και να παράγει νέες έννοιες, ακόμη και όρους τεχνολογίας και καινοτομίας. Ακούμε, για παράδειγμα, τελευταία όρους όπως android, anthropic και πολλές άλλες που χρησιμοποιούμε στον καθημερινό μας λόγο, οι οποίες όμως προέρχονται από αρχαίες λέξεις. Οι ρίζες τους πηγαίνουν πίσω στην αρχαιότητα. Αυτό όμως που παρουσιάζει ιδιαίτερο ενδιαφέρον είναι ότι όχι μόνον λέξεις και ρητά, αλλά και λαϊκές εκφράσεις και παροιμίες έχουν επιβιώσει στους αιώνες. Θα μπορούσε κανείς να φανταστεί ότι φράσεις όπως «κοντός ψαλμός αλληλούια» ή «απ' τα Αγκάθη βγαίνει Ρόδο και απ' το Ρόδο βγαίνει Αγκάθη» ήταν ήδη γνωστές από τον 16ο αιώνα. Για αυτή τη συνέχεια θα συζητήσουμε σήμερα και έχουμε κοντά μας τον καθηγητή Χαν Λάμερς, καθηγητή στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Όσλο, ο οποίος μελετά τη χρήση και την πρόσληψη της ελληνικής γλώσσας στη Δύση, ιδίως κατά την περίοδο της αναγέννησης. We will now continue in English. Professor, welcome to Delphi. Please introduce yourself briefly to our audience and tell us your main research interests.
Thank you so much for your invitation, and thank you so much for inviting me here in this wonderful site of Delphi, which I first visited with my parents when I was around 12, I think, and I was instantly fascinated by ancient Greek culture. As you mentioned, I'm professor of classics at the University of Oslo and currently also director of the Norwegian Institute in Rome. And I'm interested in the many ways in which the classical heritage has been transmitted, understood, and used after antiquity, especially from the Middle Ages up to the modern period. Specifically, I'm interested in the cultural history of ancient Greek and Latin. So how and why were these languages used after antiquity in a period where these languages have ceased to have native speakers? How were they used? Why were they used? And by whom were these languages used? In other words, I'm interested to explore how classical Greek has shaped thought and continues to shape thought and how people articulate their thoughts and experiences. Questions I've addressed in my research are, for example, why would people in the 15th and 16th century, with so many challenges to address, bother to learn ancient Greek in the Italian city-states, for example? Why would a Dutch schoolboy far away from the Greek lands in the 17th century compose a poem in Homeric hexameters? These kinds of questions really interest me, and I try to explore them in my research.
Beautiful. You will tell us all about this. But first of all, I was fascinated, and this is how I first heard about your work, with your discovery of a significant body of Greek proverbs from the 16th century. Could you please tell us about this material and what it shows about the continuity of the Greek language? And for our guests, you have in front of you a handout with some of the proverbs that have been discovered in the manuscript of the 16th century of Hermodoros Regios. You will find many proverbs that we still use in modern Greek, and it's really fascinating. So please tell us about this discovery and about how you see the continuity of the Greek language through this body of proverbs that you recently discovered.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. This is actually a very interesting collection of early modern Greek proverbs, some of which, if I understand well, are still used by Greeks today.
Many of them.
Many of them, actually. Before we made this discovery in the library of Orléans in France, only 30 of these proverbs had been published before, but these proverbs that we found, 120 of them, so 90 more than we had a record of, were collected by, as you mentioned, Hermodoros Regius at the beginning of the 17th century. Now, Hermodorus Regius was a Greek from the Aegean Islands. We do not exactly know where he came from, who was educated in Rome at a Greek college there, and was traveling through the Aegean afterwards, probably to do the work of priest. During this period, he collected proverbs as he traveled around the Aegean and noted them down in this collection. And as I mentioned, through various interesting routes, these proverbs ended up in France, and from there were sent to different scholars, mainly in France, in different portions, so sometimes 30, sometimes 60, but never, as far as we know, the full collection, until we found this manuscript in Orléans with 120 of them. I can tell you how that went if you want.
Yes, please do. Please do. And I'm very interested in learning, why were they considered important?
Yes.
They were not ancient Greek texts.
No, exactly.
Why were they considered important?
And this is an interesting point that also emerged from our research. So after we decided to go further with these proverbs, because we discovered that 90 of them had not been registered in
you
in this
and the
collection.
other professor?
Yes, so together with my colleague Toon van Hal, who is a professor of Greek linguistics at the University of Leuven and the University of Oslo. And just to give some background, we were at a research stay in Paris for different reasons. And then we decided to coordinate a research trip to Orléans because we wanted to consult manuscripts there. And while we were going through manuscripts, I was sitting here, he was sitting there at a table. At some point, I heard, let's say, a noise of excitement from my colleague on the other side of the table. So we had a look, and he was looking at a beautiful manuscript with a collection of drawings, of plants, of animals, of hieroglyphs, of antiquities, extracts from various kinds of words. But what he had before him was this list of Greek proverbs, and it explicitly stated this is a list of proverbs used by the Greeks of today, sent to me by Parvilliers, a Jesuit, and collected by Hermodorus Regius. So that's the background of this. So then we were very excited. We had a lunch, and we planned how we would continue with this. The interesting point is, apart from the fact that we have an early record, a written record of these proverbs, which is quite astonishing, what fascinated us also was that there were European scholars interested in this material, probably for various reasons. So we do not really know why they were interested in it, but as far as we can see, it was for various different reasons. Some of them were interested, we know, in the specific words used, because they had an interest in modern Greek. Others were more interested in the wisdom contained in them. So there were different approaches to these proverbs. But in any case, it shows a very early example of an emerging interest in the modern Greek, or let us say early modern Greek linguistic heritage, whereas most of the scholars in this period, and that's also the topic I've worked on most, were interested in classical Greek. So also therefore we were quite interested in this collection, because it shows both the interest of Greeks in their own linguistic heritage at a very early stage, and it shows a very early interest of European scholars, particularly based in France, in this kind of material for various reasons.
But this interest goes all the way back to Renaissance, and I can imagine that there were people interested back in the 15th, 16th century on the Greek language, although we were occupied, Greece was occupied by the Turks at that time, and the interest was so broad, especially in the language, not only in the myth or the history, but also in the language. Can you describe how this went during those times, please?
That is actually a fascinating story. So many of the interest of early European scholars in Greece and in ancient Greece went through an interest in the ancient Greek language.
When you say early,
Yes.
like what period of time?
Sorry, I should explain. Then I'm talking about the 15th century.
The 15th century.
Yes. So then we are in a period in Italy where we see the emergence of what is called humanism. Not a philosophical movement, but a collection of people interested in grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, and moral philosophy, mainly in those 5 areas. And mainly reacting against medieval Latin tendencies at the university. So they opened up a new body of knowledge in these areas that I just mentioned. And in all these areas, grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, moral philosophy, obviously the Greek heritage played an important role. Now, at the same time that humanism is emerging in the Italian city-state, and especially in Florence, we see that there is intensified contact between the Italian city-states and the Greek world. And Greek scholars are coming to Italy, sometimes invited, sometimes for their own reasons, and start educating the Italians in Greek. And like today, Greek had in that period a special status. So when, for example, Florence wanted to become the center of the cultural center of Italy, one of the first things they decided was to hire a Byzantine Greek professor, who was Manuel Chrysoloras. Chrysoloras, yes. So for a period of a few years, actually, he taught Greek at the studio in Florence, giving his Italian students an introduction to the Greek language and Greek literature on the level that they could handle.
Erotimata, right?
Yes, yeah, among other things. Yes, yeah. So he, the interesting thing with Chrysoloras is that we know that he adapted his teaching method to the standards of at that point the Italians and the Italian scholars, because we have to imagine that during this period, so when humanism emerges, especially in the early 15th century, access to Greek was still rare in Western Europe. So during the Middle Ages we see a kind of decline of Greek studies and knowledge of Greek. Greek texts disappear, knowledge of Greek grammar disappears. There were some Latin translations that continued circulating, but the direct access to the Greek language, exactly that point that the humanists emphasized so much, the direct access to the language was more or less lost, with some very rare and local exceptions. But the humanists wanted to access Greek literature more profoundly through a reading of the Greek sources, which they called ad fontes, right? Back to the sources. That was the main point of their movement, you could say.
And this started right after the fall of Constantinople?
Already a bit before. So Chrysoloras already arrives in Florence at the end of the 14th century actually. But of course this interaction intensifies with the advance of the Ottoman Turks and eventually the fall of Constantinople. Then also, let's say the Greek presence in Italy becomes even more important for the transmission of Greek knowledge, because humanists could not travel that easily to the Greek lands as they did sometimes before. So we know, for example, that a true Philhellenist of the first generation, Francesco Filelfo, he spent time in Constantinople learning Greek and taking that knowledge with him when he returned to Italy. But not everybody could afford that kind of travel, of course, so it was quite important that there were Greeks and Greek scholars in Florence, in Rome, in Venice, and other places in Italy.
And I believe that the interest was so high, especially during the 17th, 18th century, that in many countries in Europe, they were trying, scholars were trying to relate their own language to the Greek language somehow, even using some words or the foundation of the words, the roots of the words.
Well, this is an interesting story because indeed Greek became and knowledge of Greek became entangled in ongoing debates, not only in Italy, but in Europe, especially in the course of the 16th century. There were many debates going on, but one of the debates going on in this period was the use of the vernacular or native languages, French, German, Dutch, as means of literary expression, in addition, or sometimes on the expense of Latin and Italian. And during this period, scholars try to, or writers try to, let's say, ennoble their language or promote their language by connecting their language with ancient Greek. And this is, of course, before Indo-European linguistics. This is before linguistic science fully develops. So they had, let's say, their own methods of connecting ancient Greek with their own languages, which, by the way, had roots in ancient practices of etymology, but were, let's say, not scientific in the modern sense of the word. In any case, some of them, especially in France, argued that French had a privileged, special relationship with ancient Greek. And I compiled, for example, word lists, which I've been studying, that had to drive that point home. Lists with French words with their supposed Greek equivalents. To us, this seems fanciful, but for them it was a serious attempt to connect their mother language, their mother tongue, with a language that was older than Latin and could compete with Latin, which then, of course, still was the main means of expression. Both in literature and in scholarship and science. So for them, the Greek language became a means of emancipating their own languages from the dominance of Latin and other cultural languages like Italian, for example. And they are very often quite explicit about it, and they also quarrel about which language is more Greek. So there is a debate, for example, between a French scholar and a Dutch scholar, each arguing for the Greekness of their own language, and competing for Greekness, basically.
That is very interesting, because it's during that period of time that Philhellenism also emerges, and this phenomenon that began from art, but then went on through the language and the reading of texts, and this is what kept the light on for the liberation afterward, which I believe led to the liberation, to the helping of the liberation of the Greek people.
Yes, in the 15th and 16th century, you see that this label Philhellene was especially applied to those who were very conversant or very fluent in ancient Greek. So it was very much a linguistic.
Oh, was it? I didn't
yes,
know
it
that.
was very much a linguistic concept. So you could become even a Hellene, as I would say, not just a Philhellene, but a Hellene by mastering,
by being educated as the Greeks.
Yes. So some of the Greeks who were in Italy in the 15th and 16th century would confer this label of honor, let's say, to their Italian peers if they found that they were very fluent in the language. But it was mainly a linguistic recognition, as it were, a recognition of linguistic mastery.
This is very interesting because, as you mentioned before, it was there was a decline in the learning of Greek language around the Middle Ages, and then it went back. And I feel that many years ago there was also a decline started again in the classical studies, but now we see again a growing interest. Do you think that these modern times offer the ground of a much more increased interest in the humanities and the classics from your point of view, your university, your experience? Because this is what I believe, this is what I see, but I would like to hear your perspective.
Well, I think there are people way more competent than I am to talk about this, but I think that it's in a way it's quite natural, I think, for us to be interested in the humanities, and not least the historical humanities, because we are interested in our history and our language. So in that sense, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that we have an interest not only in our own history and language, but also in the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans. At the same time, also, I think it's important that humanities studies give us the tools not just to understand ourselves in a very Delphic way, you could say, but also to understand other traditions and other cultures and the people who carry them. So I think this is a kind of double value of the humanities, that they help us understand our own place in the world from a historical and longue durée perspective. On the one hand, and on the other hand, they help us to give us the tools to understand other traditions, other languages, and the persons that carry them forward.
And being at an economic forum, how does the classics help us understand politics, the economy, these modern fields? How can classic give us a solid background to understand the rest of the world, what is happening now?
Well, as a historian, a cultural historian of classical languages, I can give you a historical answer to that.
Okay, please do.
Which might inspire some in the audience. So if we go briefly back to the 15th and 16th century, we see that people outside of scholarship and academia, princes, leaders of various kinds, were interested in the classical heritage and in ancient Greek, not least, for various reasons. They were interested to see examples of good leadership, for example, how to address the capricities of history, and other things that are more, let's say, practical. So that's quite an important aspect of it, I think. Also, as you mentioned earlier, at least many humanists believed firmly that sharpening and honing your language skills and being able to express yourself well and rhetorically also had an impact on how you thought. So this connection between thinking and speaking was one of the tenets of humanism. Whatever we feel about that today, but that was definitely something that humanists would have promoted. As for today, I've tried to answer this as an historian. As for today, I think it's quite important for us in the humanities, and us more generally interested in historical and linguistic subjects, not to be too much on the defensive about the value of the humanities and languages, including classical Greek. I think we see very good signs of interest, both formal and informal, in antiquity and in classical Greece. I also think that studying classical Greek is quite a good package deal in a way. You get the language, you get the literature associated with it, you get the mythology, the philosophy that comes with it. So it's quite a good deal to study this language, I think. But as I said, I think that we should not be too defensive, and that we should really push forward with a coalition of the willing. Those with an interest in classical Greek and the humanities more generally should join and push the agenda, as you have been doing, for example. So I think that's especially important. We cannot convince people we cannot convince.
Absolutely.
And I think we should seize the momentum to create this coalition of those who see the joyful aspects of learning at first sight difficult ancient languages. I think that's quite important.
And I would like to finish with a final question that I posed also before. If you address the younger generation, teenagers, 13, 14 years old, that are, they cannot see the relevance of the classics today. They cannot see why ancient Greek or Latin is useful at this age of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, everything happening so fast. Why would someone bother learn ancient Greek and Latin today? What would you say to the
the previous speakers were definitely more competent than I to answer to this question, but I can of course relate from my own experience. I mean, when I was a 12 or 13-year-old and learning ancient Greek for the first time, I had indeed this feeling of immense joy of being able to read and understand these texts that have been written for such a long period ago. And of course, gradually, you understand, as I said, that this is a kind of package deal, that so much comes with the language that helps you in so many aspects. Critical reading skills, slow reading, engaging profoundly with something. And I think actually that's quite, maybe I'm now not talking to 13 or 14 years old, but I think it's quite important in this period especially that we have a kind of antidote to the quick memes, the quick messages, the texts that easily pass and go away and vanish into nothing, and that we really situate ourselves or reconnect ourselves through slow reading, through conscious engagement with ancient texts, reconnect ourselves with a longer tradition and understand that the present is embedded in much longer traditions than we sometimes may think it is. And I think that even if 13 or 14 years old would not understand that now, probably they will when they are 40.
Yes,
I think.
So that's what I believe too. We need to teach children as much as we can, like parents, because I really believe that a teacher is a parent, and the parent should be a teacher to the child, and we need to equip them with tools for their life, which they may not understand in the beginning. Of course, they don't understand why they have to eat fruit and vegetables. It's the same thing. You try, to nourish them with this wonderful information that they will understand its value in the coming years. So thank you, Professor, very much for this wonderful discussion. Βλέπουμε λοιπόν ότι η ελληνική γλώσσα παρουσιάζει διαρκές ενδιαφέρον για τους ξένους ερευνητές σε όλες τις φάσεις της ιστορικής της διαδρομής, ως ένας ενιαίος άξονας σκέψης που διατρέχει το χρόνο. Πώς διαμορφώθηκε όμως αυτή η σημασία? Πώς ήδη από την αρχαιότητα η ελληνική γλώσσα κατέκτησε μια τέτοια θέση ώστε να θεωρείται απαραίτητη για τη μόρφωση? Γνωρίζουμε, για παράδειγμα, ότι οι Ρωμαίοι μάθαιναν συστηματικά ελληνικά, παρά το γεγονός ότι είχαν ήδη κατακτήσει τον ελληνικό κόσμο. Το ερώτημα, λοιπόν, είναι με ποιον τρόπο διδασκόταν η ελληνική γλώσσα στην αρχαιότητα και πώς μεταδιδόταν αυτή η παιδεία. Η επόμενη προσκεκλημένη μας, η διακεκριμένη καθηγήτρια αρχαίων ελληνικών Eleanor Dickey, έχει μελετήσει σε βάθος αυτό το ζήτημα και θα μας παρουσιάσει τον τρόπο με τον οποίο διδασκόταν η ελληνική γλώσσα στην αρχαιότητα και τι μπορούμε να αντλήσουμε ακόμα και σήμερα από τη γνώση των αρχαίων προγόνων μας. Μείνετε μαζί μας, επανερχόμαστε σε πολύ λίγο. Πλήστας χάριτας ομολογότε και επίσταμε. Χάριν είδα το των Δελφών ιδρύματι και το δεσπότη αυτού και φυσικό το λόγο απάσες και απάσεις της παρούσι και της παρούσες σήμερον ενθάδε. Το εμόν όνομα εστιν Ευγενία Μανωλίδου, ηγούμε δε της Σχολής Αρχαίων Ελληνικών Ελληνική Αγωγή, διδακτηρίου τινός εν Αθήνες, ο ήδη έτη 2 και 30 την αρχαίαν ελληνικήν γλώτταν της πεσί και της νέης και της ενηλικία γεγονόση προάγει. Εν το ημετέρω διδακτηρίο συνεστάθη μέθοδος της ή τι των αρχαίων φωνήν ως ζώσαν προσεγγίζει, ώστε το πλήθη των λέξεων χρήστε ή να βοηθήσει ημίν και τις συμμετέρεις μαθητές προς την αμήνο της γλώτης γνώσιν. Χαίρετε, Professor Dickey. Είναι μεγάλη μου τιμή σήμερα να συζητώ με την καθηγήτρια Eleanor Dickey. Η Eleanor Dickey Είναι καθηγήτρια κλασικών σπουδών στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Reading και Fellow of the British Academy. Είναι διεθνώς αναγνωρισμένη για τη συμβολή της στη μελέτη της αρχαίας ελληνικής και λατινικής γλώσσας, καθώς και της αρχαίας γλωσσικής εκπαίδευσης. Η έρευνά της επικεντρώνεται στην κοινωνιογλωσσολογία των κλασικών γλωσσών, στην ιστορία της γραμματικής και της υπομνηματικής παράδοσης, καθώς και στην έκδοση και ανάλυση των κολόκουια του έργου «Ερμηνεύματα ψευδοδοσιθεάνεα», ενός σώματος δίγλωσσων σχολικών κειμένων που παρέχουν άμεσες μαρτυρίες για τις πρακτικές εκμάθησης της ελληνικής γλώσσας από λατινοφόνους μαθητές. Τα κείμενα αυτά αποδεικνύουν ότι η γλωσσική εκπαίδευση περιελάμβανε ήδη από τα αρχικά στάδια την ανάγνωση, τη γραφή, αλλά και την κατανόηση προφορικού λόγου, καθώς και την παραγωγή λόγου μέσα από δομημένους διαλόγους καθημερινής χρήσης. Γεγονός που τεκμηριώνεται και από τα ίδια τα σχολικά παραδείγματα που έχουν διασωθεί. Η συμβολή της Eleanor Dickey συνίσταται στην αναθεώρηση της εικόνας που διαθέτουμε για τον τρόπο της διδασκαλίας των αρχαίων ελληνικών και έχει ανοίξει διεθνώς εκ νέου τη συζήτηση για το πώς μπορούμε να προσεγγίσουμε σήμερα τη διδασκαλία των κλασικών γλωσσών. Αξίζει επίσης να σημειωθεί ότι μόλις την περασμένη εβδομάδα ανέλαβε τη θέση της επίτιμης προέδρου της Classical Association, του κυρίου επαγγελματικού φορέα των κλασικών σπουδών στο Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο. I will now switch to English. Professor, welcome to the Delphi Economic Forum. It's a pleasure and a great honor to have you with us today. Now, we are at the Delphi Economic Forum. So we have two ancient Greek words and one Latin word together in one short phrase. Now, would the ancients approve of that?
Absolutely, they would have approved that. The ancients absolutely would have approved that. There were hundreds and hundreds of Latin words that were borrowed into ancient Greek. Not in the 5th century BC, a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. So, tell us, how did the Romans learn Greek, and why did they want to learn Greek, first of all?
So, in a sense, there's a very simple answer to the second question, which is the Romans learned Greek because everybody else was learning Greek, and they didn't want to be the only barbarians around the Mediterranean. But of course, that just raises more questions. So why was everybody else learning Greek? Why did they feel they would be the only barbarians if they didn't? And that's got a kind of longer answer, because it doesn't really have to do with Greek in Greece, because in Greece, Greek was normally spoken by people whose parents had been Greek. But then Greek spreads to all over the Mediterranean, so the whole Eastern Mediterranean becomes largely Greek-speaking, and large chunks of the West, including pretty much half of southern Italy. So you get this happening not just because Greek speakers move from Greece to these areas. They do move from Greece to these areas. But to a much larger extent, you get people in these areas who have Greek neighbors deciding that they want to be Greeks too. And this is something really fascinating that happens to the Greek language, that it becomes a world heritage already more than 2,000 years ago, that you can become a Greek if you get a Greek education. It doesn't mean just being able to speak Greek. You need to read and write Greek and have studied some Greek literature, and that makes you a Greek, regardless of who your parents were. In places like Egypt, in places like what is now Turkey, you get lots of people whose parents are not Greeks, but they're Greeks. And as that kind of spreads, you get the entire upper class, pretty much, in a lot of these areas, becoming Greeks, because of course, school is not free. You have to pay to get your Greek education. So it is the richer parents who are making the choice to send their children to get this Greek education. And when you have a situation like this, then when the Romans come along and the Romans start expanding and conquering Greek speakers, and of course the first Greek speakers they conquer are the ones in Italy, and the Romans don't accept this paradigm of everybody who's anybody speaks Greek. They say, no, we're the Romans, and we're bigger than you are, we are stronger than you are, we can kill you, and we're going to conquer you. And they do conquer them. And they think that's going to be the end of it, but it's not the end of it, because the Greek speakers in Italy say, yeah, okay, you have longer swords than we do. You're barbarians with longer swords than us, but you're still barbarians because you don't have a Greek education. And the Romans think about this for a while, and they think, actually, we want to have a Greek education too. We're going to go with this. They are convinced by the people they have conquered, but they don't want to do it quite the way the people in Egypt or what is now Turkey did it, because those people actually switch languages. So lots and lots of native languages that were spoken before the Greeks got to various places died out because all of their speakers switched to Greek. So they get this Greek education, and then they raise their children speaking Greek, and they forget the previous language. And that's, of course, something that happens today. So people move to England, they have another language, but they send their children to English-speaking schools. The children grow up speaking only or mainly English, and they don't pass their language on. Some people think that's good. I personally, as a linguist, think it's kind of sad if people lose their languages. But the point is, it's something that happens. It happens now, and it happened back in the ancient world as well. And that's not what the Romans wanted. They said, we're not sending our children to any immersion classes in ancient Greek. We want to keep our Roman heritage. Latin is an important language. We want our own literature and our own heritage, and we're going to have both. And so they invented something that's really, really unusual in the ancient world, which is a bilingual, bicultural education system. And every Roman child who went to school, which is not every Roman child, because school still costs money, but if you do go to school, you learn to read and write in 2 alphabets, in 2 languages, and you learn and you study 2 different literatures. So you read the Iliad, which is the kind of central text that Greek speakers need to have in order to sort of be proper Greeks, but you also read Latin literature. Now that's a special choice. Now we don't think twice about it. Lots and lots of modern countries, it's normal to learn a foreign language in school. But it's not normal in the ancient world, because education's hard. Learning 1 language and culture is hard. Learning 2 is really, really hard. It's not unique that the Romans do it. The Assyrians do it too, but it's really unusual. And they make that decision because they feel they really have to have Greek. Okay, so that's why. Now let's move on to how.
To how.
So it was hard to learn Greek in the ancient world because it was hard to read Greek. If you've been up to the archaeological site at Delphi, you see all of these inscriptions, and they're just a string of capital letters. There's no spaces between the words. There's no punctuation. There's no difference between capital and lowercase letters. This is hard. And you might think, okay, it's just the inscriptions. They didn't write their books that way. They did write their books that way. And in order to show that, I've actually made a replica of what the beginning of the Iliad would have looked like in a book from 2,000 years ago. So a book did not look like a book looks today. It was a papyrus roll. Papyrus is not paper. It's a reed that grows in Egypt. Still grows in Egypt. So I got some papyrus, and I made it into a roll, and I copied out the beginning of the Iliad onto it so that you can see what the beginning of the Iliad would have looked like. And I'm now going to ask this to be passed around. Be careful with it. It took days to make. But you can unroll it, you can read it, you can see what it really was like trying to read the Iliad. Now, if you're a Greek speaker, you'll see it's not impossible. You can do it. But the reason you can do it is that you know lots and lots of Greek words already if you're a Greek speaker, and therefore you can work out where the words divide. But now imagine that you are not a Greek speaker. You are just learning Greek. Now you cannot do it because you can't work out where the words divide, and so you can't use a dictionary. They have dictionaries. Already, the very early period, there are dictionaries of Greek. But they're no use. If you don't know where the word starts and you don't know where the word ends, you can't use a dictionary. So the Romans had a special problem that we don't have when learning Greek, and they solved it using a special method. So I hope all of you have a paper handout. Do you have a handout?
We will pass it out now.
Right, okay.
Thank
Could you
you.
pass the handout out, please? Yes, they're passing it out. So they decided to divide up Greek and into really narrow columns and have parallel columns of Greek and Latin. So what I have done on this handout is I've taken a real ancient text which was used for learning Greek, but I've made it comprehensible. So I've put in the word divisions, I've put the accents and the breathings in the Greek, I've put in capital and lowercase letters and punctuation, and I've also put an English column. But none of that is there in the original. It's just 2 columns of capital letters with no word divisions. And what this system does is it's 2 texts with a line-for-line equivalence. So whatever it says on one line in one column, it says the same thing on that line in the other column. And I haven't quite managed to make it work in English. That's why there's a couple of blank lines, because English has fixed word order. But Latin and Greek don't. So it works fine in Latin and Greek. And that means that it is a glossary. Anything that you want to know, you just look across the next column and you've got it. But it's also a continuous text. You can cover up the Latin column and read the Greek column. And it's also a translation. You can cover the Greek column and read the Latin column. What did they do with this? They tell us what they did with it. You memorize the Greek column using the Latin column to make sure you understand what all the words and phrases mean. And then you come and you recite it. Probably not sort of mechanically, but you perform it as a dialogue. You'd make a little play out of your Greek learning. Keep in mind, we are 2,000 years ago. Yep. And if you look at the context, read what it says. It's a cute little story. It's a story of a child who goes to school, or in this case, he doesn't go to school, but he's supposed to go to school to learn Greek. But he hasn't showed up. He is in trouble. And he gets out of trouble because he has a really good excuse. He says his father took him to town. He had important business, and his father is way too important to waste time taking the kid back to school when he gets letters from the emperors. He's pulling rank on the teacher. The father's an important judge. The teacher, school teachers are not important in the Roman world. So I didn't give you the whole thing because it's quite a long dialogue, but it's totally successful. The teacher is humiliated silence that does not punish the child. Now, I'm sure this happened sometimes in the ancient world. It's not proper by our standards, but I think it probably did happen. But this is not a work of history. This is a work of fiction. And it was written by an ancient teacher. The story of the child pulling rank on the teacher and getting away with missing class was written by a teacher because that teacher knew that this was the way to keep children happy and entertained on their language work. And that, I think, is a fascinating thing about more than 2,000 years ago. People worked out, this is what people need to learn Greek. They need something that's fun. They need something that starts them off slowly so that it's not too hard. And they need something that is really going to give them the words and the phrases that they need. Because if you read more of these dialogues, you'll see that they contain all the words and phrases that you need to have your day in school in Greek, because, of course, they are the story of somebody who's having a day at school in Greek. So that's how.
So, and there are many more dialogues in your book.
Yes.
All the research of the colloquia, there are many more dialogues like this,
Yes.
which shows us the way that the Romans actually learned ancient Greek through everyday dialogues, and then this developed and ended up into the ability of the student being able to read an ancient text.
Absolutely.
But nowadays, we have completely changed that, and students learn through grammar and syntax method, and by memorizing many words, by translation. And do you think that they have lost the joy of reading this way?
I think I want to take you back a couple of steps. You say, now they have to memorize. They had to memorize in the ancient world too. They memorized these dialogues.
Okay.
The ancients believed in memorization. but they didn't want to memorize things that were disconnected. They thought that was hard. So you memorize, but you memorize your vocabulary in context. You have this story. And so they do memorize, and they do learn grammar. The little stories about the school, they tell us exactly what people are doing in school. And they're doing a lot of grammar. The ancients were clearly not afraid of grammar, because ancient Greeks got a lot of it. And they learn the cases, they learn the declensions, they learn how to conjugate their verbs. This is something that is going on, but it's going on in a kind of friendlier, more joyful context. Mm-hmm. And so I think, yes, there is perhaps something that we've lost today, that I've tried these dialogues on students, and they like it much more than many of the things that one does today. And they, you get a pair of them to decipher a dialogue. Sometimes I take the right-hand column out and make them work it out, but sometimes I give them both columns, and I tell them to do what the ancient student did, which is work out who speaks which lines. So there's nothing for them to do. It's not just sort of mechanical memorization, but there's still something for them to do actively and think about, which I think is important. And they have a wonderful time doing their little plays in front of the class.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you have also managed to create a project as an ancient Greek school.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I have something I call the Reading Ancient Schoolroom, where we go and we recreate a school from Roman Egypt. And I picked Roman Egypt because that's where we have more evidence than anywhere else. So it's a Greek-speaking school in Roman Egypt, and everybody tries little dialogues like this. It doesn't really matter if they don't know any Greek. I mean, if they don't know any Greek at all, we're not giving it to them in the Greek alphabet, obviously. But if they don't know any Greek at all, we can teach them the Greek alphabet. But we teach them how to take dictation onto a wax tablet, which was an important ancient skill. We teach them how to make ancient ink and how to use that ink to write on a piece of clay ostrakhan, because papyrus is very expensive. Children are not writing on papyrus in school. They write on their wax tablets, which are reusable, or they write on their ostraca, their pieces of broken pottery, because those are free. And the school sometimes takes a trip to the local rubbish dump to pick up all the pieces of pottery as writing materials. Or sometimes they even write on chips of stone. And so we try these things with real children today. And it really helps them understand what the ancient world was really like. And it also helps them understand how much fun the ancient world can be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's really important for the children, in order to learn something, to have fun out of it.
Absolutely. I think it's completely essential. And not just for children, you know?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, fun should be absolutely the root of learning, because I'm not saying you can't learn if you're not having fun, but it's way, way easier to learn if you're having fun.
Absolutely. So do you think there would be some ways to reintroduce those approaches today?
Yes, I think there are a number of different things that one could do. I believe passionately that there's no one best method, because different people have different kinds of brains. Mm-hmm. And that is something that the ancient teachers who wrote the colloquia were very aware of. They say it's really important that you give the right exercise to every child. You give every child the exercise that that individual needs, they say. So think about 5 things. They say, think about how smart the child is. Think about what the child has already done. Think about how old the child is. Because, there's stuff in the Iliad that will give a small child nightmares. Mm-hmm. Even if the child's Greek is good enough to read some of those sections, you might not want to give that child nightmares. So think about how old they are. Think about how much time they have in your school today, because different children spend different number of hours in school. It's not everybody arrives at 9 and everybody leaves at 3 or anything like that. And then the last one, my favorite. Think about the child's disposition as regards hard work. And then they don't tell us how to think about the child's disposition as regards hard work. But nevertheless, they think that you should take that into account. You should take all these individual features into account and design the right experience for each child. And I think that's something we've really lost sight of today, that we take a class and we try to keep them all together, and it can be as many as 30, and we try to do the same thing with all of them, which, of course, may be what you have to do if you are one teacher with 30 children, but nevertheless, you lose a bit of something there, because there is no one method of teaching Greek that's going to be right for all of those children. And so I'd encourage flexibility about method. We've heard a lot today about the importance of speaking, and I think for some people it's really, really important that they do have the opportunity to speak, because there are parts of your brain that are linked with your ears that are not linked with your eyes. And if you don't actually use those parts of your brain because Greek is purely visual for you, then you're actually trying to learn Greek with only part of your brain, and you could be trying to learn Greek with more of your brain, and then it would be easier. But there are some people who really, really don't want to speak. And ideally, I'd like a plurality of possibilities so that different people could learn in different ways, and everybody could learn in the way that suits them, just the way the ancient and much more labor-intensive education system allowed.
Now, you mentioned in the beginning that this discussion that especially for modern Greek speakers, they can recognize some words, a lot of ancient words. And what would you say to a Greek student that believes that ancient Greek is very hard? Do you think that we have, like Greek people, native Greek people have a privilege of learning ancient Greek a little bit faster and easier?
Definitely. I would say definitely. You wouldn't have to learn all the vocab that I learned. I think we've heard a lot today about the importance of not reading stuff that's too hard. And I think that's really true. You don't want to start, even if you're a modern Greek, you wouldn't want to start with Aristophanes. Start with something that isn't too hard. I enjoy learning modern languages by picking up a children's book where I can understand most of it already, the comprehensible input that we've been talking about. And then I can just read it and I pick up the other words, and I don't actually have to do any work at all. And that's supposed to be how Schliemann taught himself to read Homer. He said he picked up modern Greek translations of novels that he'd enjoyed, and he read those translations because he knew the novel already, and then he tried reading something from a bit earlier, and he got himself back to Homer. Now, we're not all Schliemann, and I'm not sure I could have done that. But different people learn in different ways. Find the way that works for you is what I would say to those students. Everybody's different. Find what works for you, but don't pass up the opportunity to do something so wonderful.
Yeah, well, I would say that we should start with ερμηνεύματα, with the colloquy of ερμηνεύματα ψευδοδοσιθεάνε, because it's such a joy to read and connect to the ancient world and find out that we have so many more things in common than we believe. And by being in Delphi today, people for many, many years, for centuries, used to come in Delphi to seek the right answers for them. But later on in life, we learn that we first need to ask the right question.
Yes.
What do you think, and I would like to finish this discussion with this, what do you think the right question would be to someone that wants to learn Greek and Latin or to become involved with the classics today? Why would they want to do that?
I think not everybody will want to do that, and we maybe need to accept that different people are different, and not everybody needs ancient Greek. Not everybody needs a phone, not everybody needs a computer, not everybody even needs a house. Not everybody needs ancient Greek. But as we've also heard today, it's really enriching. It's something that can give you a lot of joy, make your life a lot happier, just the way having a house, having a computer, having a phone can do. And so I would encourage people to explore it and see if it's for you. And just find out kind of student you are, or if you are a student at all. Give it a try, is what I would say.
Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us today, for sharing this wonderful information. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Έχουμε τη χαρά να υποδεχτούμε τον Βύρωνα Νικολαίδη, ιδρυτή και διευθύνοντα σύμβουλο της εταιρείας PeopleSort. Τα τελευταία χρόνια, μέσα από τη δημιουργία της πρώτης διεθνούς πιστοποιήσεως στην αρχαία ελληνική γλώσσα, έχει συμβάλει ουσιαστικά στο να αποκτήσει η μελέτη της ένα σύγχρονο παγκόσμιο πλαίσιο αναφοράς. Χιλιάδες μαθητές από την Ελλάδα και το εξωτερικό και διάφορα εκπαιδευτικά συστήματα έχουν ήδη προσεγγίσει την αρχαία ελληνική γλώσσα μέσα σε αυτή τη διαδρομή ως ένα αντικείμενο με σαφή στόχο, δομή και προοπτική. Καλησπέρα σας, κύριε Νικολαίδη, πάλι εδώ, μετά από ένα χρόνο από την τελευταία μας συνάντηση. Πάμε να δούμε λίγο αυτά τα τελευταία 2-3 χρόνια που η πιστοποίηση των αρχαίων ελληνικών έχει μπει δυναμικά μέσα στο πεδίο. Πόσα παιδιά έχουν επιστοποιηθεί, τι γίνεται με αυτή την πιστοποίηση στα σχολεία και πώς νομίζετε ότι θα εξελιχθεί και θα προχωρήσει η πιστοποίηση αυτή των αρχαίων ελληνικών.
Κύριε Μανωλίδου, πρώτα απ' όλα συγχαρητήρια για το έργο σας.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Ευχαριστώ για την πρόσκληση.
Αλλήμον.
Ξέρω ότι πρωί, μεσημέρι, βράδυ, 24/7, ασταμάτητα θα έλεγα, ασχολείστε με την αρχαία ελληνική γλώσσα, τη διάδοση της παγκοσμίως, κάτι το οποίο είναι εξαιρετικά σημαντικό, όπως θα πω και στη συνέχεια, για την ήπια δύναμη, το soft power της Ελλάδος. Στο πλαίσιο αυτό και εμείς ως φορέας πιστοποίησης προσώπων, πλέον θα έλεγα ως ο μεγαλύτερος παγκοσμίως φορέας πιστοποίησης προσώπων, μετά από κάποιες τελευταίες εξαγορές που κάναμε, ως έχουν περίπου 3.000 πιστοποίησεις παγκοσμίως, καλύπτοντας σχεδόν τα πάντα. Χαρά μας είναι να στηρίζουμε την πιστοποίηση της αρχαίας ελληνικής γλωσσομάθειας στο πλαίσιο της κοινωνικής μας προσφοράς. Και βέβαια, αυτό πράγμα το οποίο προσπαθούμε να κάνουμε και βοηθώντας και εσάς, είναι να φέρουμε τα αρχαία ελληνικά κοντά στον κόσμο.
Μάλιστα.
Οι περισσότεροι από εμάς, κυρίως αυτοί οι οποίοι είναι στη δική μου ηλικία, όχι δική σας, έχουμε μάθει αρχαία ελληνικά. Εμένα μου άρεσαν τα αρχαία ελληνικά όταν ήμουν μαθητής. Αλλά τα έχουμε συνδέσει με έναν τρόπο διδασκαλίας, ο οποίος ήταν όχι ελκυστικός, για το πω λίγο ελληνικά. Ναι. Λοιπόν, έχουμε κάνει και μία έρευνα πριν από μερικά χρόνια, να θυμάστε, όταν ξεκινήσαμε, ότι τι πιστεύει ο κόσμος για τα αρχαία ελληνικά, και αυτό το πράγμα το οποίο βλέπουμε είναι ότι ο κόσμος αγαπάει τα αρχαία ελληνικά.
Ναι, βέβαια.
Τα έχει μέσα στην ψυχή του. Έτσι. Θέλει τα αρχαία ελληνικά, δεν του αρέσει, απεχθάνεται τον τρόπο με τον οποίο έμαθε. Και επειδή σήμερα η διδασκαλία μιας οποιασδήποτε ξένης γλώσσας, είτε αυτή λέγεται αγγλικά, γερμανικά, γαλλικά, ελληνικά, τουρκικά και αρχαία, έχει μπει σε ένα πολύ σαφές πλαίσιο. Είναι 4 δεξιότητες, listen, reading, writing and speaking, να το πω αγγλικά, και είναι 6 επίπεδα, α1, α2, β1, β2, γ1, γ2. Αυτό έχει κατησχύσει παγκοσμίως, το ευρωπαϊκό πλαίσιο, και έτσι μαθαίνουμε σήμερα όλοι ξένες γλώσσες. Μαθαίνουμε αγγλικά, όλα τα παιδιά σήμερα μαθαίνουμε αγγλικά. Σε ιδιωτικά σχολεία, σε φροντιστήρια, στα δημόσια, σε κάποιο βαθμό. Και όχι μόνο στην Ελλάδα, παγκοσμίως. Το ίδιο τα γερμανικά, το ίδιο τα γαλλικά. Ακριβώς το ίδιο πράγμα πρέπει να είναι και τα αρχαία ελληνικά. Με έναν τρόπο που να έχει αρχή, μέση και τέλος, που να μετράται οι γνώσεις. Ναι. Να ξεκινάω εδώ, έμαθα αυτά τα πράγματα και έφτασα εκεί. Και αυτό το πράγμα ακριβώς κάναμε. γιατί στον χώρο της γλωσσομάθειας, στον χώρο τον ξέρουμε καλά, στον χώρο της γλωσσομάθειας της αγγλικής γλώσσα, η People's για τη θηγατρικής της Language, είμαστε νούμερο 4 παγκοσμίως. Μετά το Cambridge, το TOEFL και την Pearson είμαστε νούμερο 4. Μέσα σε 120 χώρες περίπου. Οπότε ξεκινήσαμε αυτή την προσπάθεια και με τη βοήθεια τη δική σας. Προσπαθήσαμε και εμείς να συμβάλλουμε, να βοηθήσουμε. Και σήμερα υπάρχει κανονική πιστοποίηση, παγκοσμίως αναγνωρισμένη, σε επίπεδο Α1, Α2, Β1, Β2 και τώρα πάμε και σε Γ1.
Σωστά.
Το οποίο το έχουν πάρει κάποιες, δεν θυμάμαι τον ακριβή αριθμό, αλλά μιλάμε για
αρκετές
χιλιάδες ανθρώπων. Για χιλιάδες ανθρώπων το έχουν αγκαλιάσει και βλέπουμε μάλιστα, όπως μου λέγατε και εσείς, ότι πλέον τα παιδιά θέλουν πολύ περισσότερο από τους ίδιους δασκάλους, τους καθηγητές.
Αυτό είναι αλήθεια. Τα παιδιά αναζητούν και το επόμενο επίπεδο. Μας τηλεφωνούν από σχολεία και λένε τα παιδιά πήρανε το Α1 και τώρα ζητάνε και το Α2. Και για μένα αυτό είναι πάρα πολύ ενθαρρυντικό και βλέπω το πώς μπορεί τελικά η γλώσσα όταν δίδεται στα παιδιά από την αρχή, από το ξεκίνημα και όχι μέσα από πολύπλοκα και δύσκολα κείμενα και σίγουρα κείμενα τα οποία δεν είναι συναφή προς την δική τους ζωή, προς την δική τους καθημερινότητα. Είδαμε πριν την κυρία Δίκη, η οποία έλεγε ότι τα κείμενα αυτά που βρήκαμε, ο τρόπος με τον οποίο μάθαιναν αρχαία ελληνικά οι Ρωμαίοι στην αρχαιότητα, ήταν με κείμενα τα οποία ήταν σχετικά, δηλαδή ξεκινούσαν με διαλόγους, με κείμενα καθημερινά, τα οποία ήταν σχετικά με τη ζωή του παιδιού. Δηλαδή το παιδί μπορούσε να νιώσει, να καταλάβει τον διάλογο, γιατί έβαζε μέσα και τη δική του την προσωπική εμπειρία. Έτσι ακριβώς γίνεται και με την πιστοποίηση. Ξεκινάμε με το επίπεδο Α1, με απλές λέξεις, απλές φράσεις, απλούς διαλόγους. Συνεχίζουμε στο Α2 με λίγο πιο απαιτητική γραμματική και βεβαίως μετά στο Β1 και στο Β2 που συμβαδίζει με τις υπόλοιπες γλώσσες οι οποίες πιστοποιούνται, που πλέον έχουμε την ανάγνωση και την κατανόηση αρχαίων κειμένων και τις επιλογές των παιδιών για να δούμε σε ποιες ερωτήσεις, σε ποιες ασκήσεις μπορούν να ανταποκριθούν καλύτερα. Αλλά το όραμα το δικό σας για την πιστοποίηση αυτή, ποιο είναι, τι σας οδήγησε να δημιουργήσετε αυτή την πιστοποίηση και τι περιμένετε από αυτό, τι θέλετε να προσφέρετε?
Ξέρετε, είμαι Κωνσταντινοπολίτης.
Μάλιστα.
Γεννήθηκα, μεγάλωσα, σπούδασα στην Κωνσταντινούπολη και τότε, στο περιβάλλον το τότε εκεί, που εκείνη την εποχή δεν ήταν τόσο φιλικό όσο είναι σήμερα, εμείς μαθαίναμε πολύ καλά ελληνικά.
Ναι.
Και μαθαίναμε και πολύ καλά αρχαία ελληνικά. Δηλαδή, ακόμη θυμάμαι αυτό του Γεωργίου Ζούκη,
Μάλιστα, το αναγνωστικό.
Πρώτη γυμνασίου, Δευτέρα γυμνασίου και όλα αυτά τα σχετικά. Λοιπόν, και όπως και να το κάνουμε, η ελληνική γλώσσα, η γλώσσα μας είναι πολύ ουσιαστικό στοιχείο του πολιτισμού μας.
Της ταυτότητάς μας, εσύ.
Και είναι κομμάτι της ήπιας ισχύως της Ελλάδος. Εμείς τώρα είμαστε ένας οργανισμός ο οποίος δραστηριοποιείται σε πάνω από 200 χώρες. Και έχουμε τα αγγλικά, τα οποία είμαστε σε 120-130 χώρες και κάποια άλλα πλαίσια, το ITIL, το Πριστού κλπ. Και βλέπουμε τι γίνεται με την βρετανική ήπια ισχύ. Δηλαδή, εμείς ουσιαστικά, λόγω της φύσεως της δουλειάς μας, λειτουργούμε παγκοσμίως ως ένα μικρό βρετανικό σύμβουλο, British Consul, το οποίο δεν στοιχίζει τίποτα στους Βρετανούς φορολογούμενους. Και λέω, άμα το κάνουμε αυτό, δεν το κάνουμε για μας, δεν το κάνουμε για μας, για την Ελλάδα, για την πατρίδα μας. Και κάπως έτσι ξεκίνησε όλη αυτή η προσπάθεια και κάνουμε δύο πράγματα. Πρώτον, δημιουργήσαμε αυτή την πιστοποίηση. Και δεύτερον, κάναμε και μία έρευνα, η οποία ακόμη δεν έχει τελειώσει. Έχει τελειώσει το πρώτο στάδιο. Τι ισχύει για τα αρχαία ελληνικά παγκοσμίως. Σε περίπου 200 χώρες κάναμε την έρευνα, πιο βαριά σε καμία 20, και βλέπουμε ότι τα αρχαία ελληνικά έχουν πολύ μεγαλύτερη ζήτηση και πέραση, αν θέλετε, παγκοσμίως παρά στην Ελλάδα. Μόνον στην γειτονική μας Ιταλία. Ξέρετε πόσα άτομα μαθαίνουν 3 φορές την εβδομάδα, επαναλαμβάνω, 3 φορές την εβδομάδα αρχαία ελληνικά σε κλασικά λύκεια. 120.000 άτομα. Μόνον στην Ιταλία. Οπότε εμείς είμαστε μια μικρή χώρα. Αλλά είμαστε περήφανοι για την ιστορία μας. Είμαστε περήφανοι για τον πολιτισμό μας. Είμαστε περήφανοι για τον Όμηρο. Είμαστε περήφανοι για την Ηλιάδα και την Οδύσσεια. Και είμαστε περήφανοι για τη γλώσσα μας. Δυστυχώς, θα πω εγώ, στο βαθμό που πέφτει λόγος, καταργήσαμε τα αρχαία ελληνικά από τα σχολεία.
Ναι, καταργήσαμε τα κλασικά λύκεια, καταρχάς, κλείσαμε τα κλασικά λύκεια και τα αρχαία ελληνικά ως μάθημα δεν έχουν καταργηθεί, αλλά διδάσκονται με τέτοιο τρόπο όπου τα παιδιά αντιδρούν και είναι, δυστυχώς τελειώνουν το σχολείο και χαίρονται που σταματούν τα αρχαία ελληνικά. Ενώ στην πραγματικότητα θα έπρεπε να είναι τελείως το αντίθετο. Αλλά στην Ιταλία, το παράδειγμα που αναφέρατε πριν, εγώ θα ήθελα να πω τον πόνο μου, έχει να κάνει κυρίως με αυτά τα περίφημα κλασικά λύκεια, που πηγαίνουν χιλιάδες παιδιά, ήδη από την πρώτη γυμνασίου ξεκινούν και κάνουν, όπως είπατε, 3 φορές την εβδομάδα, 4 έως 6 ώρες αρχαία ελληνικά και λατινικά. Με αποτέλεσμα κάθε χρόνο να αποφυτούν παιδιά τα οποία έχουν τελειώσει το κλασικό λύκειο. Παιδιά τα οποία δεν γίνονται απαραίτητος φιλόλογοι. Λίγα παιδιά από αυτά ακολουθούν κλασικές και ανθρωπιστικές σπουδές, αλλά έχουν το υπόβαθρο αυτής της κλασικής παιδείας. Νομίζετε ότι η πιστοποίηση που προσφέρεται με τόσο απλό τρόπο στην αρχή, πιο σύνθετο αργότερα, δίνει ένα κίνητρο στα παιδιά για να προχωρήσουν, να συνεχίσουν και να ενδιαφερθούν περισσότερο για τη γλώσσα?
Προφανώς, και ο λόγος είναι το εξής. Πιστοποίηση σημαίνει μετρό. Ξέρω που βρίσκομαι και ξέρω που θέλω να πάω. Και όταν φτάσω στον προορισμό μου, που υπάρχουν και ενδιάμεσοι προορισμοί, αυτό δημιουργεί μια αίσθηση επιτυχίας. Ότι ήμουνα στο 1 και μετά προσπάθησα και πήγα στο 2 και μετά προσπάθησα και πήγα στο 3 και μετά πήγα στο 4 και όχι μόνο το βλέπω εγώ και χαίρομαι, αλλά το δείχνω κιόλας. Είναι και κάτι το οποίο μπορώ να το επικαλούμε στους φίλους μου, στην παρέα μου.
Και στα ξένα πανεπιστήμια δεν είναι μόνο στους φίλους μου και στην παρέα μου, γιατί εμείς έχουμε παιδιά τα οποία έχουν πια τελειώσει το σχολείο και πηγαίνουν στο εξωτερικό για να σπουδάσουν ένα αντικείμενο και μέσα στο φάκελο που καταθέτουν, που έχουν το απολυτήριο του Λυκείου, που έχουν τα διάφορα πιστοποιητικά που ζητούν τα ξένα πανεπιστήμια από κάποιο άθλημα που μπορεί να κάνουν τα παιδιά, από κάποιο όργανο που μπορεί να παίζουν. Τα πανεπιστήμια πια δεν θέλουν να γράψει στο βιογραφικό σου «ξέρω πιάνο», αλλά ποια τάξη του πιάνου έχω τελειώσει με πιστοποίηση, με ένα χαρτί, ένα δίπλωμα που να αποδεικνύει. Το ίδιο πράγμα γίνεται και με τα αρχαία ελληνικά. Μας παίρνουν οι γονείς, μας λένε σταθήκανε, πήγε το παιδί στην Αμερική και σταθήκανε περισσότερο στην πιστοποίηση των αρχαίων ελληνικών. Δεν το πιστεύαμε το πόσο πολύ σημασία δίνουν οι ξένοι σε αυτό που θεωρούν κάτι πολύ δύσκολο, που για εμάς, εάν το ξεκινήσουμε με το σωστό τρόπο, είναι πολύ πιο προσβάσιμο.
Φύγετε τον πυρήνα της ουσίας της δουλειάς μας, που είναι skilling, reskilling, upskilling, που πράγματι σε όλα τα πράγματα, παγκοσμίως, πλέον δεν ισχύει η γνωστή ρίση του τσαρούχη είσαι ό,τι δηλώσεις. Είσαι αυτό για το οποίο είσαι πιστοποιημένος. Έχεις κάτι το οποίο αποδεικνύει τις γνώσεις σου. Αλλά για να ολοκληρώσω αυτό που έλεγα πριν, εμείς λοιπόν με αυτόν τον τρόπο πιστεύω ότι συμβάλλουμε στο να αυξηθεί σημαντικά το ενδιαφέρον για την ελληνική γλώσσα, για την αρχαία ελληνική γλώσσα. Και αυτό είναι κάτι το οποίο το θέλουμε όλοι μας. Δεν νομίζω ότι υπάρχει κάποιος που να μην το θέλει. Τώρα, σε αυτό που είπατε πριν, ξέρω ότι ήμουν πριν σε ένα πάνελ περί τεχνητής νοημοσύνης κλπ. Και το ένα πράγμα που είναι προφανές, μία από τις τάσεις των τελευταίων ετών που θα ενισχυθεί, είναι ότι η τεχνητή νοημοσύνη μπαίνει παντού.
Παντού.
Και το ένα στοιχείο, το ένα αποτέλεσμα, αν θέλετε, το οποίο είναι προφανές, είναι ότι απειλούνται θέσεις εργασίας λευκού κολάρου. Θέσεις γραφείου απειλούνται. Και χάνονται και θα χαθούν. Και τώρα και πολλά πράγματα θα αυτοματοποιηθούν. Το βλέπουμε τώρα με το ChatGPT, με το Gemini, με το Mythos, με όλα αυτά τα σχετικά τα οποία βγαίνουν. Και το ερώτημα τώρα είναι, καλά τώρα τι μας λες εσύ αυτό, τι σχέση έχουν αυτά με την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη και τα αρχαία ελληνικά. Εγώ λοιπόν είμαι αυτούς οι οποίοι πιστεύουν ότι η γενικότερη παιδεία που θα έχει κάποιος και τον προφυλάσσει και του ανοίγει ορίζοντες και τον βοηθάει να έχει πιο σταθερές βάσεις. Δηλαδή πιστεύω κάποιοι άνθρωποι, οι οποίοι όσο αστείο και αν σας φαίνεται, οι οποίοι θα έχουν μια γενικότερη παιδεία αρχαίων, λατινικών κλπ, λιγότερο θα επηρεαστούν από την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, θα προσαρμοστούν πιο εύκολα στις επιταγές των νέων καιρών που έρχονται.
Ναι, ναι, σίγουρα. Μα βλέπουμε εμείς και μάλιστα χαριτολογώντας, ήθελα να σας το πω, δεν έχω προλάβει ακόμα, ότι πλέον όταν μας στέλνουν και βιογραφικά νέοι φιλόλογοι που έχουν τελειώσει το πανεπιστήμιο, μας λένε τελειώσαμε το πανεπιστήμιο και κάτω σε όλες τις πιστοποίησεις που έχουν, μας βάζουν και την πιστοποίηση της PeopleCert. Οπότε πια έχουμε αρχίσει να λαμβάνουμε βιογραφικά ανθρώπων οι οποίοι θέλουν να εργαστούν στην ελληνική αγωγή, τα οποία επάνω έχουν και την πιστοποίηση της PeopleCert, που βεβαίως δεν γνωρίζουν την σχέση και την αγάπη που έχουμε εμείς στην πιστοποίηση αυτή και το πόσο πολύ την προτείνουμε προς τα παιδιά μας και τους μαθητές μας.
Έτσι είναι. Ξέρετε, εμείς απασχολούμε σήμερα περίπου 6.000 ανθρώπους σε όλο τον κόσμο. 3.000 full-time και 3.000 part-time. Το 99% απόφοιτη πανεπιστήμιου με master και doctorate. Δεν θέλεις ανθρώπους οι οποίοι να βγαίνουν από μηχανή του κύμα, να έχουν όλοι το ίδιο βιογραφικό. Όλοι μας ψάχνουμε για ανθρώπους οι οποίοι να ξεχωρίζουν, να έχουν κάτι ξεχωριστό. Προφανώς το να βάλεις στο βιογραφικό σου ότι εγώ έτσι, επειδή μ' αρέσει, επειδή το προσπάθησα, επειδή το πιστεύω, έκατσα και ασχολήθηκα και έφτασα στο επίπεδο Α2 ή Β1 αρχαίων ελληνικών, αμέσως σου κινεί το ενδιαφέρον. Λες, για να το δω αυτό, ποιος είναι αυτός τώρα, γιατί το έχει κάνει αυτό το πράγμα. Και από εκεί μετά ξαφνικά γνωρίζει πολύ ενδιαφέρον τους ανθρώπους, γιατί παρακούσα την ερώτηση που κάνετε προηγουμένως. Γιατί ρε παιδί μου κάποιος να πάει σήμερα να μάθει ελληνικά, αρχαία ελληνικά. Μα για να ξεχωρίσει. Μα όπως είπε, για να ικανοποιήσει τον εσωτερικό του κόσμο. Για να διευρύνει τους ορίζοντές του. Τα αρχαία ελληνικά, όπως και τα λατινικά, σου δίνουν τόσο καλή γενικότερη μόρφωση, που και στην εποχή της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης σου δίνουν την δυνατότητα να αξιοποιήσεις τα εργαλεία της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης με πολύ καλύτερο τρόπο για να σου μαθαίνουν να σκέφτεσαι. Δηλαδή, τώρα έχει βγει εδώ, αυτό που θα πω είναι λίγο αιρετικό, εδώ και μερικά χρόνια, 2-3 χρόνια, το prompting. Τι είναι το prompting? Είναι πώς να κάνεις ερωτήσεις για να παίρνεις τις σωστές απαντήσεις από διάφορα προγράμματα τύπου ChatGPT, Gemini και τα υπόλοιπα. Εγώ προσωπικά αυτό δεν το πιστεύω. Έχουν βρει και διάφοροι άνθρωποι οι οποίοι λένε έλα εδώ να σε μάθουμε να εκπαιδευτείς για να κάνεις prompting. Να με μάθει να εκπαιδευτώ τι? Να μάθω πώς θα κάνω εγώ τις ερωτήσεις διαδοχικά για να φτάσω σε ένα αποτέλεσμα? Μα αυτό το πράγμα μου έμαθα στο σχολείο. Και αυτό το πράγμα διεύρυνε τη σκέψη μου, τα αρχαία ελληνικά και όλα τα υπόλοιπα. Και όταν έρχονται σε εμάς, ήρθαν και εσωτερικά και το τμήμα το δικό μας κανένα και μου λέει να πάρουμε στους υπαλλήλους μας εκπαίδευση για prompting. Μου λέει τι το κάνουμε το prompting? Θέλουμε ανθρώπους οι οποίοι πραγματικά να μπορούν να την κάνουν τη δουλειά. Δεν χρειάζεται να εκπαιδευτώ εγώ για να κάνω τις ερωτήσεις.
Και να σκέφτονται, γιατί βλέπουμε ότι έχει αποδυναμωθεί η σκέψη στους νέους ανθρώπους και η ταχύτητα με την οποία παίρνουν πια την πληροφορία τους αποδυναμώνει τον τρόπο να ψάξουν αυτή την πληροφορία βαθύτερα, να μπορέσουν να δουλέψουν με το μυαλό τους περισσότερο και να μην δέχονται άκρητα τις απαντήσεις τις οποίες δίνει το οποιοδήποτε μηχάνημα αναζήτησης. Γιατί βλέπουμε και πολύ ατυχή παραδείγματα παιδιών τα οποία επηρεάζονται τόσο πολύ, καλά και όχι μόνο παιδιών, και μεγαλύτερων ανθρώπων, επηρεάζονται τόσο πολύ που εφαρμόζουν τις επιταγές, τις απαντήσεις της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, χωρίς καν να σκεφτούν εάν αυτό που τους λέει είναι σωστό ή λάθος. Δηλαδή, η καλή γνώση της γλώσσας και μέσω των αρχαίων ελληνικών και των λατινικών και κυρίως των αρχαίων ελληνικών, που κακά τα ψέματα και εμείς ως Έλληνες είναι πολύ πιο εύκολο για εμάς να τα μάθουμε, να τα καταλάβουμε, αλλά κυρίως να γνωρίσουμε τη γλώσσα μέσα από την πλαστικότητα και την πολυπλοκότητα που έχει η γλώσσα μας. Αυτό ξεχνάμε ότι σε ένα δεύτερο επίπεδο μας καλλιεργεί πάρα πολύ τον τρόπο της σκέψης μας, την κριτική μας ικανότητα. Πώς θα μπορούσε λοιπόν, κατά τη γνώμη σας, η εποχή αυτή της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης να ωφελήσει στη διδασκαλία, στην εκμάθηση μάλλον των αρχαίων ελληνικών και αν αυτό όντως μπορεί να γίνει?
Ακριβώς αυτό συζητάγαμε σε ένα προηγούμενο πάνελ. Και το θέμα είναι γενικότερα η τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, πόσο θα επηρεάσει τα πανεπιστήμια, πώς θα επηρεάσει τη γνώση, πώς θα προσλαμβάνεται η γνώση και κατ' επέκταση αυτό πώς θα πάει στη τεχνητή νοημοσύνη. Διάβαζα λοιπόν πριν από 3-4 μέρες, ξέρω τώρα για να πάρεις ένα πτυχίο, κανονικά πας 4 χρόνια στο πανεπιστήμιο. Σε κάποιες χώρες πας 3 χρόνια. Στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες, πανεπιστήμιο full αναγνωρισμένο, εκεί δεν υπάρχει η έννοια ότι πρέπει να το τελειώσει σε τόσα χρόνια. Σου λέει αν πάρεις τόσα credit, αν πάρεις τόσα μαθήματα.
Έχεις ολοκληρώσει.
Πες. Λοιπόν, έκατσε κάποιος και πήρε πτυχίο bachelor σε 4 μήνες.
Σε τι αντικείμενο?
Δεν θυμάμαι. Σοβαρό πάντως. Πλήρως αναγνωρισμένο. Δεν έρχεται ο άνθρωπος εδώ πέρα και το αναγνωρίζει από το ΔΟΑΤΑ, από την Κατσά, την άλλη μέρα. Και μάλιστα έφτιαξε και ένα ολόκληρο group που λέει και στους υπόλοιπους, παιδιά, κάνετε αυτό, θα κάνετε έτσι, τους δείχνει πώς να το κάνουν. Τώρα, δεν σημαίνει ότι ένας άνθρωπος ο οποίος σε 4 μήνες έμαθε και πέρασε κάποια μαθήματα που κάνουν 4 χρόνια, ότι ο βαθμός της αφομοίωσης του είναι ο ίδιος. Προφανώς δεν είναι. Αλλά όπως και να το κάνουμε, αυτή είναι μια νέα πραγματικότητα. Και αυτό που φαίνεται ότι οδηγούμαστε στα πανεπιστήμια είναι κάτι αντίστοιχο που συμβαίνει, όπως μου λέει και ο Υπουργός της περασμένες, στην ιατρική. Όπως πάμε στην εξατομικευμένη πλέον ιατρική. Δηλαδή παλιά τη λέγαμε η χολυστερίνη, τώρα λέει αν είναι σωστά πρέπει να είσαι από 180 μέχρι 220, τα νούμερα τυχαία δεν τα θυμάμαι ακριβώς. Και σου λέει τώρα εμείς εσένα που σου κάναμε όλα τα τεστ και τα είδαμε και ακριβώς και τ' ένα και τ' άλλο, εσύ δεν πρέπει να είσαι μεταξύ 180 και 220, για σένα πρέπει να είσαι μεταξύ 193 και 198. Κάτι αντίστοιχο πηγαίνει να γίνει και στην παιδεία. Αρχίζει να γίνεται η εξατομικευμένη παιδεία ανάλογα με το ρυθμό που μπορεί να αφομοιώσει ο καθένας, που προφανώς συνιστά πολύ μεγάλη ανατροπή στο εκπαιδευτικό σύστημα. Και αυτό που είναι σίγουρο είναι θα μαθαίνουμε πολύ πιο εύκολα, πολύ πιο γρήγορα με τη χρήση νέων εργαλείων. Αυτό είναι μονόδρομος. Εάν το πάρουμε λοιπόν το ίδιο πράγμα και το εφαρμόσουμε στα αρχαία ελληνικά, τα επίπεδα πάλι α1, α2, β1, β2, γ1, γ2 θα παραμείνουν τα ίδια, αλλά αντί να χρειάζεσαι κατά μέσο όρο 200 ώρες διδασκαλίας και 200 ώρες πρακτικής, περίπου χοντρά, ας πούμε ότι τόσο είναι για να πας από το ένα επίπεδο στο άλλο, θα χρειάζεσαι μισές, θα χρειάζεσαι λιγότερες. Αυτό τι καλό μας δίνει? Μας δίνει τη δυνατότητα να μπορέσουμε να μάθουμε και να αφομοιώσουμε έννοιες, σκέψεις, τρόπο σκέψης των αρχαίων ελληνικών πολύ πιο σύντομα, πιο εύκολα, όπου το όφελος θα είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερο.
Ναι, αλλά στην ιατρική, τώρα εγώ θα κάνω λίγο και το δικηγόρο του διαβόλου. Στην ιατρική τώρα θέλεις έναν άνθρωπο που να έχει περάσει 10 χρόνια στο πανεπιστήμιο και άλλα 10 χρόνια στα χειρουργεία. Τώρα πάει να σε χειρουργήσει κάποιος που έχει πάρει το πτυχίο σε 4 μήνες και έχει βγάλει το σχολείο σε άλλους 6, δεν θα κάτσει να σε χειρουργήσει.
Για το χειρουργείο τώρα υπάρχουν, μπορεί να έχει πολύ μεγάλη συζήτηση, είναι και ο Υπουργός εδώ, αλλά λέγεται...
Θέλεις και την εμπειρία, δηλαδή, αυτό θέλω να πω.
Αλλά στο θέμα της διάγνωσης, κάτι το οποίο λέγεται είναι ότι το ποσοστό σωστής διάγνωσης από τους γιατρούς είναι περίπου 85%, ενώ το ποσοστό, και σταθερό, ενώ το ποσοστό σωστής διάγνωσης από την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη είναι 92% και ανεβαίνει. Ωραία, να μην μπούμε σε αυτό το debate, αλλά εγώ σας λέω τώρα τι γίνεται παγκοσμίως.
Είναι άλλο πάνελ αυτό.
Είναι άλλο πάνελ αυτό. Αυτό που θέλω να καταλήξω όμως είναι τα εργαλεία τα οποία υπάρχουν και η τεχνητή νοημοσύνη αλλάζουν τον κόσμο. Ναι. Και το αλλάζουν με έναν τέτοιο τρόπο όπου η κατανόηση, η απόκτηση, η κατανόηση της γνώσης θα γίνεται πιο εύκολα, πιο βατά. Και σε ένα τομέα σαν τα αρχαία ελληνικά, που αυτό το πράγμα εθεωρείται και θεωρείται ακόμη σχετικά δύσκολο, όπως και να το κάνουμε το διευκολύνει και αυτό ανοίγει περισσότερες δυνατότητες. Το οποίο σε αυτό συμφωνήσουμε όλοι.
Μα φυσικά, είπατε προηγουμένως, αναφέρατε την εξατομικευμένη μάθηση και την Αμερική. Και πριν από λίγο καιρό διάβαζα για ένα σχολείο στην Αμερική που πλέον έχει εξαπλωθεί σε όλη την Αμερική εδώ και τα τελευταία 10 χρόνια, που διαφημίζει ότι διδάσκει εξατομικευμένα τους μαθητές όπως έκανε ο Σοκράτης στον Πλάτωνα, ο Πλάτων στον Αριστοτέλη, ο Αριστοτέλης στον Μέγα Αλέξανδρο, το λέει ακριβώς έτσι. Και τι κάνουνε, τα παιδιά έχουν από μία ηλικία και έπειτα, μαθαίνουν τα academics, τη γλώσσα, την ιστορία, τα μαθηματικά, κάνουν μάθημα 2 ώρες την ημέρα από τον υπολογιστή, με ένα εξατομικευμένο πρόγραμμα, αναλόγως με το πόσο γρήγορα μαθαίνει ένα παιδί ή πόσο χρόνο θέλει για να μάθει και με ποιον τρόπο μαθαίνει. Μαθαίνουν, κάνουν τα academics 2 ώρες και την υπόλοιπη ώρα στο σχολείο τα παιδιά βγαίνουν έξω, κάνουν αθλητισμό, κάνουν μουσική, κάνουν φιλοσοφία, κάνουν συζητήσεις, κάνουν τέτοια πράγματα τα οποία τα εξελίσσει ως ανθρώπους. Και στο τέλος έχουν μετρήσει από τις εξετάσεις που δίνουν τα παιδιά για να μπουν στα πανεπιστήμια ότι έχουν πάρα πολύ καλά αποτελέσματα, μπαίνουν σε Ivy League πανεπιστήμια, γνωρίζουν τη ζωή, γνωρίζουν την αγορά ήδη μέσα από το σχολείο και το σημαντικότερο για μένα, σε ψηφοφορίες που κάνουν στα παιδιά τα ίδια μέσα στο σχολείο, τα παιδιά δεν θέλουν καν να φύγουν το καλοκαίρι. Θέλουν να παραμείνουν στο σχολείο, ψηφίσανε πριν από λίγο καιρό να παραμείνει το σχολείο τους ανοιχτό και το καλοκαίρι για να συνεχίσουν να πηγαίνουν και να μαθαίνουν το κάθε ένα με τον τρόπο που μπορεί. Γιατί τα παιδιά θέλουν να μαθαίνουν, είναι ανοιχτά στη μάθηση, τους αρέσει να μαθαίνουν καινούρια πράγματα, αρκεί ο τρόπος με τον οποίο τα διδάσκονται να είναι αρκετά ελκυστικός και συνεπής με αυτό που οι ίδιοι θέλουν να κάνουν στη ζωή τους.
Μα αν κάναμε αυτή τη συζήτηση 10 χρόνια πριν, όλα αυτά που λέμε δεν θα υπήρχε. Εμείς είμαστε εδώ, ερχόμαστε στο φόρουμ των Δελφών κάθε χρόνο. Ως People's είμαστε από τους σταθερούς χορηγούς. Ήταν εντελώς διαφορετικά τα πράγματα 10 χρόνια πριν. Δεν υπήρχε το teleworking. Δεν υπήρχε η τηλεδιδασκαλία. Σήμερα αυτό είναι στην καθημερινότητα. Σήμερα μπορείτε εσείς, δια της ελληνικής αγωγής, να διδάξετε άπτεστα αρχαία ελληνικά σε όλα τα παιδιά του κόσμου.
Αλήθεια. Και έχουμε πολλούς μαθητές και στο εξωτερικό.
Αυτό δεν υπήρχε παλιά. Αυτή είναι μια τεράστια δυνατότητα τεχνολογίας, η οποία μόνον θα αυξηθεί, δεν θα μειωθεί περαιτέρω. Γι' αυτό και πιστεύω ότι, ξαναγυρίζοντας από εκεί που ξεκινήσαμε, εμείς ως μια χώρα μικρή, που θέλουμε να προβάλλουμε τον πολιτισμό μας και τη γλώσσα μας παγκοσμίως, τα αρχαία ελληνικά είναι ένα εξαιρετικό εργαλείο. Δεν θα ξεχάσω ποτέ αυτό που σαν μαθητής διάβασα για πρώτη φορά, τις 2 ομιλίες του Ξενοφόντα Ζολότα, που ήταν η μία στην Παγκόσμια Τράπεζα και η άλλη στο Διεθνές Νομισματικό Ταμείο, 100% αγγλικά και με 100% μόνον ελληνικές λέξεις. Αυτό το πράγμα, το οποίο σήμερα το ξέρουν πολλοί, το προβάλλουμε παγκοσμίως, πρέπει να το πάρουμε εμείς σαν παράδειγμα, να το μεγιστοποιήσουμε στην σημερινή πραγματικότητα. Στην ιατρική, το 70% διάβαζα κάπου των όρων, των ιατρικών όρων, είναι ελληνικές λέξεις. Να το μεγιστοποιήσουμε, ούτως ώστε και σαν χώρα και σαν πολιτισμούς να έχουμε τα σχετικά ωφέλη.
Και όπως μας είπαν και οι καθηγητές μας πριν, για εμάς τους Έλληνες είναι πολύ πιο εύκολο να προσεγγίσουμε τα αρχαία ελληνικά, γιατί το μεγαλύτερο ποσοστό των αρχαίων λέξεων υπάρχουν και στα νέα ελληνικά. Κάποιες με τις ίδιες έννοιες, κάποιες με λίγο διαφορετικές. Αλλά σε κάθε περίπτωση σίγουρα δεν χρειάζεται να μάθουμε την αλφάβητο από την αρχή, δεν χρειάζεται να μάθουμε πώς συνθέτουμε λέξεις ή μια πρόταση από την αρχή. Άρα ήδη έχουμε ένα μεγάλο πλεονέκτημα στο να μάθουμε κάτι τόσο δύσκολο και τόσο σπουδαίο πολύ πιο εύκολα. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, κύριε Νικολαίδη, για τη σημερινή συζήτηση.
Εγώ ευχαριστώ πολύ. Να είστε καλά.
Από τις πρακτικές της διδασκαλίας στην αρχαιότητα έως τη διαμόρφωση της ευρωπαϊκής πνευματικής παράδοσης, όπως μας παρουσίασαν οι καθηγητές μας πριν, και από τις σύγχρονες παιδαγωγικές προσεγγίσεις έως τις εφαρμογές της τεχνολογίας και της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, προκύπτει μια ενιαία εικόνα συνέχειας και εξέλιξης. Στην αρχαιότητα η γλώσσα μας συνδεόταν με τη σκέψη και η σκέψη με την κρίση. Στο ίδιο αυτό πλαίσιο, η διδασκαλία των αρχαίων ελληνικών παραμένει συνδεδεμένη με την καλλιέργεια της γλωσσικής ακρίβειας, της ενιολογικής σαφήνειας και της πνευματικής πειθαρχίας. Και ίσως αυτό αποτελεί μια ευθύνη για εμάς σήμερα, να βοηθήσουμε ώστε να εξυγχρονιστεί ο τρόπος με τον οποίο διδάσκεται, να γίνει η γλώσσα μας πιο φιλική και προσιτή στα παιδιά, να τη γνωρίσουν με χαρά και ενδιαφέρον, να απολαμβάνουν την ανάγνωση των κειμένων και σύν το χρόνο να συνειδητοποιήσουν τη σπουδαιότητα και την αξία αυτής της παγκόσμιας κληρονομιάς. Το κτήμα ΕΣΑΗ της ανθρώπης. Σας ευχαριστώ θερμά όλους εσάς που ήσασταν σήμερα κοντά μας.
Εγώ θα ήθελα εκ μέρους όλων των ασχολούμαι με τα αρχαία ελληνικά και στην Ελλάδα και παγκοσμίως να πω ένα μεγάλο ευχαριστώ και θερμά συγχαρητήρια στην προσπάθεια την οποία κάνετε, η οποία την χάνει πολύ μεγάλης αναγνώρισης, να αυξηθεί, γιατί πραγματικά στοχεύεται σε κάτι το οποίο είναι μοναδικό και εμείς ως PeopleCert στο μέτρο των δυνατοτήτων μας θα είμαστε πάντοτε αρρωγοί.
Να είστε καλά, σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Γνώθης αυτών, μέτρων άριστον, χρόνου φίδου, σοφίαν ζήτη. Έτσι καλωσόριζαν οι Δελφοί τους προσκεκλημένους τους πριν από χιλιάδες χρόνια. Από τον 6ο αιώνα π.Χ. τα δελφικά παραγγέλματα, ρήματα βραχαία αξιομνημόνευτα, εκάστοη ρημένα, τα οποία, όπως μας λέει ο Παυσανίας, ήταν χαραγμένα στον πρόναο του Απόλλωνος, προϋπαντούσαν τους Έλληνες και τους ξένους από όλη την οικουμένη, που επισκέπτονταν το μαντίο για να μάθουν τα μελούμενα. Αυτά τα δελφικά ρητά, που αναφέρονται ως ωφελήματα γεγραμμένα ανθρώπισες βίων, γράφτηκαν από κάποιους άνδρες, οι οποίοι θεωρούσαν οι Έλληνες ότι ήταν σοφοί. Έτσι ακριβώς μας λέει ο Παυσανίας στο έργο του «Ελλάδος περιήγησης». «Εγγράφει υπό ανδρών ους γενέστε σοφούς», λέγουν συνέλληνες. Σήμερα, στον ίδιο αυτόν τόπο, καλούμαστε να θέσουμε εκ νέου το ίδιο κατ' ουσίαν ερώτημα. Πώς αυτή η γλώσσα που υπήρξε φορέας σοφίας και τρόπος κατανόησης του κόσμου μπορεί να παραμείνει ζωντανή, ώστε να συνεχίσει να μιλά στο σύγχρονο άνθρωπο? Κυρίες και κύριοι, εκλεκτοί προσκεκλημένοι, σας καλωσορίζω για άλλη μια φορά στους Δελφούς, όπου ο λόγος ήταν τρόπος κατανόησης του κόσμου και η σοφία τρόπος κατανόησης του ίδιου μας του εαυτού. Είμαι η Ευγενία Μανωλίδου, Διευθύντρια της Σχολής Αρχαίων Ελληνικών Ελληνική Αγωγή, και στο πλαίσιο του 11ου Οικονομικού Φόρουμ των Δελφών και του 5ου κύκλου του Delphi Classics in Praxis συναντιόμαστε για να εξετάσουμε εκ νέου τη θέση των αρχαίων ελληνικών στο σύγχρονο κόσμο. Από την έναρξή του, το Classics in Praxis έχει επιδιώξει να εντάξει την κλασική παιδεία σε έναν ευρύτερο διεθνή διάλογο και να φέρει σε επαφή πανεπιστημιακούς και εκπαιδευτικούς με ανθρώπους από το χώρο της οικονομίας, της πολιτικής και της τεχνολογίας. Πριν ξεκινήσουμε, επιτρέψτε μου να εκφράσω τις θερμές μου ευχαριστίες προς την Οργανωτική Επιτροπή του Delphi Economic Forum και διαιτέρως προς τον κύριο Σίμεον Τσομόκο και τους συνεργάτες του για τη διαρκή στήριξη και εμπιστοσύνη. Ευχαριστώ πολύ επίσης την PeopleCert για τη συμβολή της στη σημερινή διοργάνωση. Η εταιρεία PeopleCert δημιούργησε το 2021 την πρώτη διεθνή πιστοποίηση των αρχαίων ελληνικών στα επίπεδα Α1, Α2, Β1 και Β2, με χιλιάδες παιδιά να έχουν ήδη δώσει εξετάσεις και να έχουν λάβει την πιστοποίηση. Σήμερα θα συζητήσουμε το πώς οι κλασικές σπουδές μπορούν να ανταποκριθούν στις ανάγκες του παρόντος και να διαμορφώσουν το εκπαιδευτικό τοπίο του μέλλοντος, εστιάζοντας στη διδασκαλία της αρχαίας ελληνικής γλώσσας, στην ανανέωση της διδακτικής της, αλλά και στη διαχρονική της παρουσία, από την αρχαιότητα έως τη νεότερη ευρωπαϊκή σκέψη. Με ιδιαίτερη χαρά θα ήθελα να καλωσορίσω τις δύο πρώτες εκλεκτές προσκεκλημένες μας. Στο σημείο αυτό θα συνεχίσουμε τη συζήτησή μας στα αγγλικά. It is my great pleasure to welcome you both, our two distinguished first guests of today's session, who will open today's discussion. Evelien Brake, visiting lecturer and assistant professor at University College Dublin. Evelien Brake's work has made a significant contribution to the teaching of classics in primary and secondary education. And Helena Walters, classics teacher at Haileybury College, who teaches Latin and Greek through modern pedagogical methods. Thank you both for being here, and welcome to Delphi. Please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what first drew you to the classics. Professor.
Thank you so much, Eugenia, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak at the navel of the world. What an amazing place to speak about classics in Praxis. Gosh, well, I was crazy about myths from the moment I could read, and when I was 12, I started learning ancient Greek. It was a very young age to learn it, and I thought the letters were just so beautiful, so I fell in love with Greek, and it's a love that has never left me, really, so I love teaching it to all ages since then.
Okay, beautiful. And Miss Walters, how about you? You're very young, and you are, one representative of the younger generation that wanted to learn ancient Greek. And what drew you to the classics?
It's just so fascinating. It's such a wonderful cultural heritage that you have, and the chance to read in the original language these amazing texts and stories and to unlock that world is really what drew me to it.
But you also teach to young children.
Yes, so I teach at secondary school in the UK, so I teach from 12 years old to 18 years old, the full range.
Wonderful. Professor, your latest book on myth, recently recognized with the prestigious Homerus Prize, talks about how ancient stories continue to affect us and the way we understand today's world. Why do you think myth still speaks to us, and especially during these times of uncertainty, how can myth benefit our life and even our soul?
Yes, so my book really chimes with the theme of the forum, the shock of the new. Humans are storytellers, and so in times of uncertainty, we go looking for stories that give us comfort and understanding. It's so difficult what we're going through. These times are unprecedented, and what I've noticed is that in the discussions about technological acceleration, about climate change, about leadership, all of the discussions go back to ancient myths about the Trojan horse, about all of the Greek heroes. So I'll just give one example. So in the discussion about AI, which is of course at the forefront also of the forum, we see that the figure of Talos comes back again and again. Now your wonderful pupils discussed this already, or they gave the text of it at the opening of the forum already. So we find Talos apps, we find Talos networks, we find Talos everywhere in the names of companies. So this was the bronze giant that walked around Crete and that threw rocks at ships that came too near, but he had been made. He was a machine that had been made by Hephaestus, but he was also alive. So some people call him the first cyborg, and so it's clear that the ancient Greeks were thinking about this distinction between machine and human, and who had control over it, and what it meant to be human, and what the differentiation then was between a non-human and a human. So proponents of AI look towards Talos as like a proto-AI. They see the first step there. It's like humans have always wanted to experiment with going beyond human. And then, of course, critics of AI say, well, actually, it means that the Greeks were already thinking about, well, hang on, who has control over this? What does it mean to be something between machine and human? Can we go there? And what does that mean for humans themselves? So I think now more than ever, in fact, the storytelling is so important for the crisis we're going through. And so for me, it makes sense that humans are going back to the Greek myths, but it is also just fascinating how much they are present in the debates.
Exactly, and I believe that this is what makes the Greek language and the Greek tradition very relevant in each time. You can find texts that speak to us today, but spoke even to antiquity and the Byzantine times and the all the periods of times that came until today, which is something that I find striking as well. And you, Ms. Walter, do you teach mythology to your students?
Of course we do. That's what they love. That's what the children love. That's what brings them to classical Greek. So yes, we teach them mythology. We teach them the myths they want to know, that they know already, and then we can take them into the language using that.
How do they know them already?
I think it's part of our cultural fibre, right? You almost don't realise that you get taught to even young children. They know these stories, and then even at Haileybury, when we teach our English classes to our 11, 12-year-old pupils, the English teachers, what they choose is not anything from English literature. They choose the Greek myths because these stories are so eternal and so universal. Yeah.
And you, Professor, you have also taught primary school students. Can you tell us about this experience with ancient Greek and Latin? But we can just narrow it down to ancient Greek for today's session.
Yes, of course. So normally only secondary school students get access to ancient Greek, unless through a project also such as yours in Pedagogy. About 15 years ago, I felt that more young people should get access to ancient languages. So as I'm a classicist, I included Latin in that as well. But since I started working at Ghent University in Belgium, I worked specifically on ancient Greek. So I started a project called Ancient Greeks, Young Heroes. And so we worked with children from socioeconomically deprived backgrounds, so in the Flemish region. And they would normally have no access to ancient Greek because you need to have studied Latin first, and then you can go on to do ancient Greek. And so it's very exclusive. Very few children get access to it. But I love it so much because I found so much joy in it when I was young. So I feel that as many children should have access to it as possible because it also broadens your world and it has socioeconomic advantages. I started training university students to teach ancient Greek at primary school, similarly to how you do it, in a very playful method. We do plays, they dress up, they do crafts, and they learn the alphabet first, because obviously they don't know that yet, and especially they learn through the myths. Mm-hmm. It's the stories that are so significant for them, especially at primary school age, because children love stories then. They love the stories of the Trojan horse, of the Minotaur, etc. So we engage with them, and the effects are amazing. The children absolutely love the project. Children who maybe weren't the strongest at reading, for example, they improve. And what I've heard from the head teacher, for example, of one of the schools, was that 2 years later, when they're in secondary school, the children are still talking about learning ancient Greek at primary school. So it has such benefits.
But your book, which I love,
Thank you.
Classics at Primary School, a tool for social justice. How do you believe that by teaching classics at such a young age can function as a tool for social justice? How did you think about this idea? What did you see in the teaching of the classics that made you believe that this can help in their development, in the children's development, not only in their education?
Yeah. Well, I think we give such a high status to Latin as well, and ancient Greek as a society. It's still considered something for mostly the linguistically strongest students. And so from the moment you go outside of that traditional target group, you're already giving benefits because you're giving them access to such a supposedly difficult subject. Mm-hmm. And I will be very honest, I did not go into schools saying, oh, I am going to increase social and educational equity by doing this. I started doing it because of my own love for the language, and then it turned out that it was improving social equity. I thought, I want to share my joy and my love of this language with the pupils, and it was through doing it and through seeing their joy and through seeing how they engaged with it and the effects it had on their cognitive development, on their well-being, that I then had to come to the conclusion, oh, this is actually having effects beyond what I thought was possible. And that's why I wrote a book at the end of all of my experimenting rather than at the beginning. I think if I hadn't done all the work like you have done throughout the years, you learn.
Yes.
You learn about the different possibilities, you learn which exercises work, you learn what doesn't work. And so, it's through learning that you get an understanding of how it can improve the social educational equity. But I think it does work. I think it has been proved through research without a doubt. So I think that's where we are for the moment.
Yeah, and I believe by seeing our work at Ελληνική Αγωγή, we start by teaching the language to the children, but then they learn so much more, and they keep asking for more. And this is what, to me, this is so exciting every time that we believe the children need to learn a few things, not to be so hard, not to make their lives difficult by wanting them to learn more and more, especially during this time of acceleration of everything. But then the children themselves understand the benefit and keep asking for more.
Yeah.
And how about you, Ms. Walters? In your classroom, describe a little bit how you teach ancient Greek to the children, and at your school, when does this begin, and how does it evolve?
So at Haileybury College, we use comprehensible input. So the cornerstones of this is that what we teach must be comprehensible and it must be compelling. So comprehensible, what that means is that when we present a child with a text, I want them to be able to understand 95% of the words in that text. I don't want them to be struggling to read it. The remaining 5%, maybe they work it out from the context, maybe I help them. But the text is comprehensible to them. So we limit the vocabulary to the words that they know. But we do not shelter the grammar. We allow them to read, but the fact that they know the vocabulary will enable them to read the text. So it must be comprehensible. And the second pillar is that it must be compelling. We read ancient Greek because the stories are wonderful and exciting and interesting and provoking. So the stories that we use with our children to teach them the language must be the same. To read ancient Greek, you don't need a license. There's no license that you have to earn by slogging through hours of sentences about the slave fell in the river. No, read it straight away. Make it suitable for the children, yes, so they can read it, but make it compelling. So that's how we teach. We start 11, 12, 13, and we go all the way up to A-level to 18, and we hope that however long they join us on the journey, they enjoy it and they take away with them something that is of value.
That's wonderful. And Professor, you learned through the traditional grammar translation method, and we see that this is the majority of the children and the students, even in Greece and the world where they teach classics, that they learn through this method, grammar, syntax, translation. So they end up after 4 or 5 years of being taught ancient Greek or Latin that they cannot read a text. They read in the beginning and then they use the lexicon, and it's tiring, it's not interesting, so they just don't choose this as a subject. If you could change something in this method, if we were asked to change something, what would this be?
Oh gosh, what a question. Okay, so I would go for a very flexible approach whereby whereby there's a lot of differentiation. I wouldn't cut out grammar entirely because, believe it or not, I actually, for the moment, am teaching an entire group. Now these are adults, but they love the grammar and they can't get enough grammar, and I need to add more grammar because
this is
their
the
book
exception.
doesn't
work with teenagers.
No, that's right. No, so not for teenagers. Not for most. I loved the grammar method. I was very much of that. Yeah, the grammar-loving kind. I think differentiation is key. So having some spoken Greek and having mostly a reading approach, and then with comprehensible input, obviously with a lot of reading, lovely, great comprehensible text, and then some grammar. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel entirely, but I think there is a lot of merit in all of the approaches that exist already, and it's just finding a balance between them, and then within that balance, some differentiation, so all the pupils can find what they need and have most have need for in their learning.
You mentioned spoken Greek, but in Greece we are still a little bit reluctant to this method. We do not believe that Greek can be spoken. Well, at Ελληνική Αγωγή, we definitely teach by speaking ancient Greek, but most of the times, there are, in academia, there are different opinions. How can you teach ancient Greek by speaking it?
So I'm not an expert on this, but...
No, but, from your experience, does, even by quoting something or by saying a few words in ancient Greek, does this help?
Yeah, I do think so. So we focus, so if I just think of my own primary school project, the pupils speak ancient Greek there. They have plays in ancient Greek. What we normally do is we start by using so Dutch or English as their first language, and then they themselves can add as much Greek as they can, so they have word lists, and they have the lists of the vocabulary and the sentences that they have, and they themselves can add it. And so it's very much differentiated for every pupil, because pupils who fly with it can use as much Greek. They use entire Greek sentences in the plays. So we've had amazing sentences where they all dress up as Odysseus and the Cyclops and the sheep. So there are some groups who have ancient Greek plays. So I mean, these are not extended or advanced, but they can speak entire sentences if they want to. And then the pupils who are maybe a little bit less self-secure in their ability to speak it can then choose to have maybe a few words in an English sentence. So at primary school level, that is the approach we take. At secondary school, then, I've been in workshops where they teach it. So it's just by using straightforward language and just by having straightforward conversations and then building up from there. So I think just like we did in primary school, starting from a low level and building up.
If I may add something?
Absolutely.
I think if, as a teacher, you refuse to speak the language to the children, you transfer a fear to them, that this is not a language that you can come into contact with. This is not a real language. This is something that exists in this cold form. And if you don't have the courage to speak the language, you tell the children that it's not actually for them. So you have to speak it, because then you can make it live. It might not be perfect, but you do your best.
And I would like to pose the same question to you. What would you change if you could change something in the way children learn ancient Greek today? Because you may be teaching at Haileybury in the United Kingdom, but you have an idea of how classics is taught in Europe mainly and the world. So what would you change, if anything?
It should be fun. Like ancient Greek should be joyful. Our lessons should be joyful. That doesn't mean you take away rigor, you make it too easy. No, it's just we have fun in the classroom. We read interesting things. We have conversations. The pupils see success and progress, and they feel joy and pride in themselves. So if we teach in this way, of course you're going to want to keep reading, because you can get to this material and you can do it. So we need to remember that this is for the joy of it, and make sure that our teaching reflects that, not reflects our worries about what it should look like and precision. I agree with you. Yes, we have to teach grammar, but we read the text first, and then we can talk about the grammar if we need to. We don't go grammar first, because there are some of us who love grammar, and many teachers, we have survived this process because we did enjoy the grammar. And so there's room for that, but we need to remember that that's not for everyone. Our teaching needs to be open to everyone. So yes, we have grammar, but we have joy first and foremost.
So my final question would be, there are young people that still believe that ancient Greek is something outdated. It's something for the past. It's for the museum. We do not really need it. What would you say to these students, Professor?
Well, I think they would probably be interested enough in all of the myths and the stories anyway. So I would tell them that getting access to the language will help them get access to the beautiful stories and to a sense of reflection about those stories and about what it means to be a human in the 21st century as well.
But these stories, in the era of artificial intelligence, what do they have to tell us? Why do we need myth today in today's world?
Well, I mean, in theory, we don't need it, but as I said at the beginning, humans are storytellers, so we will keep telling stories, and it seems that we keep going back to the same stories. That's what my book finds. There is no, I didn't have to try to find them. They are everywhere, so they have something to teach us because we keep going back to them, because we find them as a society, we find them important to think with. They help us reflect about the stories that we tell now. They are stories to help us tell modern stories.
And how about you, Ms. Walters? What would you say to young students of today if they say, you know what, ancient Greek and Latin, who needs ancient Greek and Latin today? Today we have computers, we have technology, we have artificial intelligence. Why would I need to learn ancient Greek?
I mean, no one needs to learn ancient Greek. I can wake up in the morning and not know ancient Greek, but my life is so much richer for it. It unlocks a whole different way of seeing the world, and it helps us understand a culture that underpins our own culture. It's almost a second level of existence if you know ancient Greek, that you can see and understand so much of what we do and why we do it. And that's one of the most wonderful things about a teacher, is when a pupil suddenly understands, oh, that's why that is. And that's one of the most priceless moments. So you just got to give it a go and see what you get.
And you know what I believe, by seeing our students and by my own personal experience, is that you later on in your life really understand why you need it. So it's like trying to give as much as you can to the students, and you may or may not have your own children, but by being a teacher, you feel like, you know, the whole classroom is your own children. So you want to equip them with the best possible material, with the best possible tools to navigate the future. And the good use of the language, the good use of thought, because language, logos, is absolutely connected to your thoughts. So by speaking well, you're able to make good, nice, solid thoughts. Your thinking develops, your critical thinking develops more, and it's something that we really need in this in this era of artificial intelligence. So we need to equip our children with as many tools as possible, language being the first, in my opinion, and then everything else, because the times that are coming are very ambiguous, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, κυρίες και κύριοι. Παρακαλώ μείνετε κοντά μας, όπως υποδεχόμαστε τον δεύτερο προσκεκλημένο μας, ο οποίος θα μας μιλήσει για την παρουσία της ελληνικής γλώσσας στην Ευρώπη της αναγέννησης και για τον ρόλο στη μετάδοση της κλασικής παιδείας και για κάτι πάρα πολύ αγαπημένο, για τη συνέχεια της ελληνικής γλώσσας. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Μείνετε κοντά μας. Συνεχίζουμε αμέσως.